So many times white non-college educated white males have voted Republican. They voted against their own economic interest because of guns, because of gays, and because of God, the 3 Gs, God being the woman's right to choose.
House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi saying Clinton struggles with white males without a college degree because of the 3 Gs, God, guns, and gays. But critics say, try these 3 reasons: jobs, terror, and immigration. Who's right? Hi, everyone. I'm Eric Bowling. Welcome to Cashing In. Our Cashing In crew this week: Mercedes Schlapp, Rick Grinnell, Lisa Booth, and David Mercer. Welcome, everybody. Now, Rick, I'm going to start with you. Why is Hillary having a hard time with God, guns, and gays?
Well, look, I think it's because of comments like Nancy Pelosi. She is the representative from San Francisco, the place originally where diversity and tolerance was born. It's so sad how far we've fallen. Yesterday's champions of diversity have become today's intolerance. They look at just race and gender, and they don't think about ideological differences. I got one thing to say to Nancy Pelosi. I'm Harvard educated, I'm a Christian, I'm gay, I'm pro-gun, and I'm a conservative. Very good, very good. And Mercedes, what about jobs? What about ISIS? What about immigration? Those are the 3 things that people have pushed back on Democrats and specifically Hillary Clinton because of, right?
Well, that's correct. And I think it shows that Nancy Pelosi, as many of the Democrats, they've been so focused this whole week about pushing forward this identity politics, they kind of forgot about the white guy in the room. So it's interesting that they have talked about jobs, but guess what, Eric? It's all about the same old bag of tricks that we have seen, pushing forward a tax plan that would basically reduce our jobs, reduce the wages, slow down our GDP. It's the same old bag of tricks that has not worked under an Obama economy, and we're thinking that we're going to go ahead and keep pushing forward this same agenda after she just embraced democratic socialism in her speech.
All right, David, Nancy Pelosi says white, non-college educated white males voted against their own economic self-interest. Meanwhile, Democrats, let's talk about the African-American community for a second. Blacks under President Obama haven't nearly done as well as whites under President Obama. The income gap has widened under President Obama, and unemployment, African-Americans have lagged whites in unemployment over the course of Barack Obama's term. So we talk about people voting against their own economic interests. I think it's black men and women, not white, non-college educated men.
I appreciate flipping that script, but I'll say that with that comment.
Hey, David, I didn't flip any script. I just used her words and said, you want to talk about hypocrisy here. The group that's been hit the hardest under an African-American president are African-Americans.
Yeah, and I didn't see much at the Republican convention where they addressed that very concern that you're raising. And I will say this, as an African-American male, I think I'd be in more troubled times had we more of the Bush policies that we saw over his 8 years than we do, and the recovery of the economy under Obama. But if I might give some historic context to the overall question, and this is really the cultural wars overshadowing the economic interest. Thomas Franks wrote a book in 2004 that spoke to, entitled, What's the Matter with Kansas? And why are so many voters voting the cultural issues at their own economic insecurity and not voting for their economic interests? And I think that's what Nancy Pelosi was speaking to, and awakening people to the fact that they need to think about their economic interests. And that's what the Democratic Party is speaking to and spoke to through the last 4 days.
And so I want to take the least I'm trying to figure out. So why would voting for Donald Trump be any worse than voting for Hillary Clinton if you're gay or pro-God or pro-Second Amendment?
Well, and Republicans did address the concerns of African-American voters, of Hispanic voters, because what Donald Trump talked about was jobs and creating a better economy for all, an all-inclusive economy that's going to help every American get back to working. And the only group of voters that have benefited under President Obama is the rich. You look at the middle class, they've been decimated under President Obama's failed economic policies. Minority unemployment has increased, poverty has increased. All of these groups of voters have been hurting because of the failed economic policies of President Obama. And the painful thing for those voters and all voters is the fact that Hillary Clinton wants to continue those failed economic policies, and people aren't buying what she's selling because it's inauthentic. This is a woman that will embrace any policy that is politically expedient for her at the time. She talks about coal voters. She talked about coal voters on Thursday night. Those are the same voters she said she wants to put out of work. She talked about African-American voters. Well, guess what? They're hurting even more under Hillary Clinton's policies. She talks about taking the fight to Wall Street, but she has no problem taking their money.
Right. Eric, might I add a footnote here? Yeah. You know, look, I'm not sure where she's missing it, but 17 million jobs created over the last 7 years.
And how many jobs have we lost? Economic growth has been incredibly slow. He's on the bottom of presidents.
Well, economic growth has been enough for corporations to hire 17 million people. Private sector jobs, I might add. That's not myth.
Guys, I don't want. Let's not filibuster this. But David, here are the numbers. Household incomes are down under President Obama over 8 years, 7.5 years, almost 8 years now. Wages are stagnant under President Obama. And as we pointed out, African Americans have suffered the most under President Obama. Let's bring it to the top. Hey, Rick, we're going to go to Rick very quickly. Sure. There's a recent poll. We'll put the poll up. It's Hillary Clinton's honest and trustworthiness. CNN put this poll, CNN ORC, no. Do you trust her? Is she honest and trustworthy? 68% said no, only 30% said yes.
This is exactly the reason why what you just shared, Eric, is exactly the reason why after spending tens of millions of dollars in advertising, Hillary Clinton is still not beating Donald Trump decisively, that he's right there. In some polls, he's ahead. The fact is that union workers, average Americans, are flocking to Donald Trump because over the last 8 years, people like David and his party are literally trying to make the case that things are good, that they're better off than they were 8 years ago. And people do not feel that. They look at their pocketbook, they look at what they owe, they look at their credit card bills, and they say these policies are not working, so they're willing to cross over identity politics, ignore Nancy Pelosi's urging, and vote for a Republican for the first time.
You know what, Mercedes, I'm going to sign on to what Rick just said. We spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks traveling through Pennsylvania and Ohio, two battleground states, two amazingly important states. And I will tell you, in the back roads outside of Pittsburgh, and what did they say? Yeah. What did Carville say? Between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, everything else in Pennsylvania is Alabama. They like Donald Trump. They like conservatism.
Yeah, I was talking to an Uber driver who basically said, no, Trump should win Pennsylvania. And when you looked even during the primary, he did very well, obviously, in Pennsylvania. You saw Democrats cross over in supporting Trump. I think Trump really has this appeal because he's been able to really reach the heart of the American worker. When you're talking that about a quarter of white working men are unemployed, when you're looking at the fact that they're feeling that they have totally been left behind, Trump is speaking to those groups of individuals. And even for African Americans, you're talking that there are more African American men who are in jail than going to college. Poverty rates are up. You look at this. I know that it's the doom and gloom that the Democrats are saying, oh my gosh, let's not look at it, let's paint the rosy picture. But I got to tell you, it's the reality that we're living in right now, and we cannot continue under the same economic policies. Yep. It hasn't worked in the past 8 years, and there needs to be some sort of change, and that's why you're seeing the pent-up frustration
go
from
ahead,
so
David,
many.
I was just going to say, look, you got Moody's Analytics that just did a study of Trump's economic plan, and I'm not sure Mercedes saw that yet. But
they haven't done one of Hillary's yet, though.
Well, we've seen her plan, but on Moody's Analytics, they have under Trump's plan, you would lose 3.5 million jobs. So what economic policy Mercedes or any of you are talking about that Trump has?
We're not listening to Wall Street anymore.
That's going to create more jobs than Obama does? I don't know where that is.
Final thought, David, go.
Yeah.
That's it. Moody's. That's what we're going to hang the presidency on Moody's.
Eric, we're not going to listen to Wall Street anymore. The Bernie voters told us of that.
All right,
Wall Street is not Main Street.
We got to go. Coming up.